The hum of the HVAC system was the only sound in the office, a low, sterile vibration that felt worlds away from the static of a radio dial. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, San Francisco was waking up in a haze of millennial gold. It was March of 2000, and the city felt like the center of the universe, a playground of fiber-optic cables and overnight IPOs. I sat in a chair that cost more than my first car, staring at a flat panel monitor that displayed a sleek, minimalist interface for our new media portal. I was 24, a senior creative lead with a stock option plan and a view of the Bay Bridge. By all accounts, I had arrived. But as I reached for my coffee, my sleeve brushed a small, square object tucked under the edge of my desk calendar. I pulled it out. It was a Polaroid. The chemical colors bled out at the edges, turning the Oregon sky into a bruised shade of violet. Leo, the dev team is pushing the 8 a.m. build. You want to see it before the London call? I didn't look up. Sarah, my assistant, was standing in the doorway, the glow of the hallway fluorescent lights catching her headset. She was the personification of the new world, efficient, digital, and always connected. 5 minutes, Sarah, I said, my voice sounding thick even to my own ears. Everything okay? She asked, stepping closer. You look like you're seeing a ghost. Just an old photo, I replied, finally turning the Polaroid toward her. She squinted at the 6 faces huddled in front of a rust-streaked white van. Is that you? Is that a flannel shirt tied around your waist? It was 1994, I said with a faint, tired smile. Flannel was a religion back then. She laughed, a quick, polite sound. You look so angry. All of you do. We weren't angry, I whispered, looking back at the boy I used to be. We were suffocating. In the photo, I was standing between Marcus and Chris. Marcus had that defiant, jaw-set look he always wore when his dad talked about Yale. Chris was just staring at the camera like it was an intruder. Then there were the girls. Maya was in the center, her dark hair wind-blown, looking like she already knew the road would break us. Beside her were Claire and Jada, their arms linked, a fragile chain of solidarity against the suburban boredom of Silver Bay. Sarah left, her heels clicking a rhythmic digital beat down the corridor. I leaned back, the leather of my executive chair creaking. In this office, everything was calculated. Risks were managed. Failures were just data points. But in 1994, failure had a smell. The scent of wet pine needles, burnt clutch fluid, and the metallic tang of a Pacific Northwest rainstorm. We didn't have GPS. We didn't have cell phones. If you went missing, you were just gone. I closed my eyes and the hum of the air conditioner morphed into the roar of a 1988 Econoline engine. I could almost feel the vibration of the floorboards against my sneakers and the weight of a shoebox full of dubbed cassettes at my feet. We thought we were stealing a van to find freedom, but we were really just trying to find out if we existed outside of our parents' expectations. The London call was waiting. The new millennium was screaming for content. But for a moment, I wasn't a creative lead. I was just a kid in a flannel shirt, holding a tattered map and praying that the road would never end. The rain in Silver Bay didn't fall. It hovered, a relentless gray mist that turned the evergreen trees into jagged ghosts. In May of 1994, the air felt thick with more than just moisture. It tasted like damp wool and the metallic anxiety of finals week. I sat in the back of the honors lounge, the scratch of a number 2 pencil against an SAT practice booklet sounding like a death march. If a train leaves Station A at 60 miles per hour... I looked up. Across the room, Marcus was staring at a blank page, his knuckles white as he gripped a highlighter. His father was a judge. His mother was on the school board. For Marcus, life wasn't a journey. It was a series of check boxes leading to a mahogany desk and a soul-crushing mortgage. We were all being groomed for a future that felt like a well-decorated cage. "I can't breathe in here," Marcus muttered, loud enough for the proctor to clear her throat. He didn't care. He caught my eye, and the desperation in his gaze was a live wire. An hour later we were at the secret spot, a hollowed-out concrete alcove beneath the Silver Bay Pier. The tide was coming in, the waves slamming against the pillars with a rhythmic, hollow boom. The six of us huddled there, the wind whipping Maya's hair across her face. "My mom found the application for the Portland Art Institute under my mattress," Maya said, her voice trembling. She wasn't looking at us. She was watching a piece of driftwood get pulverized by the surf. She tore it up. She told me if I didn't submit the Princeton essay by Monday, she was selling my cameras. Everything. She called it clearing the distractions. "It's not just the school," Jada added, hugging her knees to her chest. Her oversized thrift store sweater was soaked at the cuffs. "It's the way they look at us like we're just projects, investments that haven't matured yet." Chris kicked a rusted soda can into the water. "My old man bought a new Econoline for the hardware store. Keys are sitting on the kitchen counter next to his bourbon. He's out cold by 10 every Friday." A heavy silence fell over the group, broken only by the groan of the pier's timbers. The idea hung in the air, a shimmering, dangerous thing. It wasn't the first time we'd joked about leaving, but the air felt different today. It felt electric. "We have the money," Claire said softly, reaching into her backpack and pulling out a weathered envelope. "My shift savings. If we pool it, we can get to the coast, maybe further. There's that place in the Olympics, that commune near the rainforest. No phones, no transcripts, no potential." "It's a 5-hour drive just to get to the trailhead," I said, the chronicler in me already mapping the logistics. We'd be gone before they even woke up for Saturday morning coffee. I looked at Maya. She finally turned her head, her eyes red-rimmed but sparking with a sudden fierce clarity. "Leo, if I stay here until Monday, I'm going to disappear. I can feel it happening already." I looked around the circle. 6 teenagers, fueled by flannel, Gen X apathy, and a sudden, terrifying surge of hope. We weren't thinking about survival kits or fuel economy. We were thinking about the way the road looked in movies, a straight line to a horizon where no one knew our GPAs. 10 o'clock tomorrow night," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial growl. "During the homecoming game, everyone will be at the stadium. The police will be directing traffic in the north side. We take the service road." "Are we really doing this?" Claire whispered, her voice barely audible over the crashing waves. I looked at the borrowed map in my pocket, the creases white from being folded too many times. "Yeah," I said, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "We're doing it." The plan was set. We were going to be the ones who actually left. But as we climbed back up the dunes toward our separate, stifling homes, a dark shape was waiting by the trailhead. A pair of headlights flickered on, cutting through the Oregon mist and pinning us like deer in a spotlight. The driver didn't move. They just sat there idling, the engine a low, predatory rumble in the dark. The headlights didn't belong to the police. As the car crept forward, the rusted grille of a beat-up sedan revealed itself. It was only Tommy, a burnout from the grade above us, looking for a place to smoke away from the stadium lights. He didn't even look at us as he rolled by, but the shot of adrenaline had already done its work. My hands were shaking so hard I had to shove them into my pockets. That was the first warning. Out here, even a shadow could feel like a sentence. Friday night arrived with the sky the color of a bruised plum. While the rest of Silver Bay was screaming under the mercury vapor lights of the high school football stadium, we were ghosts moving through the suburbs. I met Chris behind his father's hardware store. The air smelled of industrial mulch and rain-slicked asphalt. He was already there, leaning against the white 1988 Econoline van. He didn't say a word. He just held up the keys. They glinted under the flickering yellow street lamp, a small serrated piece of metal that felt like the key to a different dimension. "He's out?" I whispered. "Snoring," Chris said, his voice tight. He tossed me a heavy duffel bag. Tents, sleeping bags, and every canned peach in the pantry. Get in. One by one we picked up the others at the edge of the woods. Marcus was first, looking over his shoulder as if his father's gavel might come swinging out of the dark. Then Jetta and Claire, breathless and smelling of nervous sweat and cheap perfume. Finally Maya. She emerged from the shadows carrying only her camera bag and a small rucksack. When she climbed into the passenger seat next to Chris, she didn't look back at the town. She just stared straight through the windshield. "Go!" she said. The engine turned over with a guttural, reluctant roar that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet neighborhood. Chris jammed it into gear and we lurched forward. We took the service road, staying low and keeping the headlights off until we cleared the last residential stretch. As we crossed the county line, the tension in the van snapped like a guitar string. Marcus let out a jagged, hysterical laugh. Jada reached into her bag and pulled out a shoebox. "I've been saving this for the border," she said, sliding a cassette into the deck. The opening chords of Lithium surged through the tinny speakers, distorted and raw. It was the anthem of everything we were leaving behind. The boredom, the fake smiles, the potential that felt like a weight around our necks. We rolled down the windows, letting the freezing Oregon and night air rush in, smelling of salt and freedom. "Leo, the map!" Marcus shouted over the music, hitting me on the shoulder. I pulled out the tattered atlas. In the dim amber glow of the dome light, the lines of the highway looked like veins. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my pager, the little plastic leash my parents used to track my every move. Without a word, I rolled down the window and let it go. I watched it bounce once on the blacktop before disappearing into the dark. One by one, the others followed suit. The clatter of plastic on pavement was the most beautiful music I'd ever heard. We were 6 kids in a stolen van, fueled by a half-tank of gas and a collective delusion that the road had no end. For the first time in 17 years, the air didn't taste like Silver Bay. It tasted like wood smoke and limitless, terrifying possibility. "Where first?" Chris asked, his eyes reflecting the green glow of the dashboard. Maya looked at me, a wild, beautiful spark in her eyes that I'd never seen under the fluorescent lights of the Honors Lounge. "West," she said, "until we can't hear anything but the ocean." Chris floored it. The van groaned, the speedometer needle dancing toward 70, and for one brief, breezy moment, we actually believed we were faster than the future. We were flying through the dark, the 90s screaming in our ears, convinced that as long as the tape kept spinning, we would never have to grow up. The fire crackled with a rhythmic snap, sending a spiral of orange sparks into a sky so black it felt heavy. We had found a clearing near the Cioslaw River, far enough from the highway that the only sound was the water rushing over smooth stones, and the low melodic hum of a Pearl Jam song drifting from the van's open doors. For the first time in our lives, there was no clock ticking toward a curfew, no looming deadline, no shadow of a parent standing in a doorway. I sat on a fallen cedar log, my notebook open on my knees, but I wasn't writing. I was watching the others. In the dancing firelight, the sharp, anxious edges of their Silver Bay personas were softening. Marcus was actually laughing, a deep, genuine sound, as he shared a tin of lukewarm beans with Jaita. Claire was wrapped in a wool blanket, staring at the stars with a look of profound, silent relief. "You're doing it again," a voice whispered beside me. I turned to see Maya. She had tucked her camera away and was holding a mug of tea brewed over the fire. She sat down, her shoulder brushing mine. The warmth of her was the only thing keeping the damp coastal chill at bay. "Doing what?" I asked. "Recording," she said, nodding at my notebook. "You're living in the future, Leo. Trying to figure out how you'll tell this story before the story's even over." "Someone has to remember it," I said, though I felt a flush of heat in my cheeks. "In 10 years we might think we dreamed this." She leaned her head on my shoulder, and the scent of wood smoke and rain-drenched pine from her hair filled my senses. "Look at them, Leo. Really look at them." I followed her gaze. Chris was leaning against the van, his silhouette etched in gold by the fire. He looked like a king in a kingdom of shadows. There was a fragile, crystalline beauty to the moment. We were caught in a pocket of time, a brief window between the know of our pasts and the unknown of our futures. We were truly dangerously free. "Do you think we'll make it?" Maya asked softly. "To the commune? To the life where we don't have to be senior creative leads, or judges, or good wives?" I looked at her, seeing the flickering fire reflected in her dark irises. In that moment, I would have promised her anything. I would have told her the road went on forever. "We're already there, Maya," I whispered. "This is it." She turned her face toward mine, and for a heartbeat the world narrowed down to the space between us. The air felt charged, vibrating with the same electricity that had sparked our escape. When she kissed me, it didn't taste like a high school romance. It tasted like rebellion. It was desperate and sweet, a frantic attempt to anchor ourselves to something real before the tide of the world pulled us back out to sea. Around us, the others began to settle into their sleeping bags. The fire died down to a glowing bed of embers, casting long, wavering shadows across the clearing. The river continued its relentless cooling song. "I never want to go back," she murmured against my neck. "Then we won't," I promised, and in the blissful, breezy ignorance of 19, I actually believed it. I leaned back against the log, pulling the blanket over both of us, watching the embers pulse like a dying heart. The night was perfect, the air was clear. We had survived the first day, and the van was still full of gas. I closed my eyes, drifting off to the sound of Maya's steady breathing, convinced that we had outrun reality. I didn't see the heavy, dark clouds rolling in from the Pacific, or the way the wind was beginning to pick up, carrying the first scent of a storm that wouldn't just soak our clothes, but would wash away the very ground we were standing on. The morning didn't break. It leaked. A cold gray drizzle had replaced the romantic starlight, turning the lush Oregon greenery into a sodden, monochromatic wall. Inside the van, the air was thick with the smell of damp socks and the sour tang of 6 people who hadn't showered. The high of freedom had evaporated with the morning mist, replaced by the gritty reality of the Cascades. "I'm telling you, we missed the junction for Highway 126, Marcus snapped, his fingers stabbing at the tattered atlas spread across his knees. The paper was already beginning to soften and tear at the creases from the humidity. Chris gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. The van groaned as he downshifted to navigate a hairpin turn that seemed to lead only higher into the fog. "The sign was obscured by branches, Marcus. I followed your lead. You're the one who said the commune was past the Mackenzie Bridge." "I said near the bridge, not 30 miles into a logging road that isn't even numbered," Marcus shouted back. I sat in the middle bench, feeling the vibration of the engine through the floorboards. The sense of adventure that had carried us out of Silver Bay was fraying. In 1994, being lost wasn't an inconvenience. It was a physical state of being. There was no blue dot on a screen to reassure us. There were only the green depths of the forest, and the increasingly terrifying realization that the map in Marcus's hands was just a piece of paper, not a promise. "Everyone just shut up for a second," Maya said from the passenger seat. She had her window cracked, trying to catch a glimpse of a landmark through the clouds. "The gas light is on." The silence that followed was heavier than the rain. We all leaned forward, staring at the dashboard. Sure enough, the amber glow of the low fuel indicator was pulsing like a warning light on a submarine. "How long has that been on?" Jada asked, her voice small. "Since the last 3 climbs," Chris muttered. "I thought we'd hit a station by the summit." "There are no stations out here, Chris. This is a seasonal road," Claire cried, her voice rising toward a panic we had all been trying to suppress. "We're in the middle of a national forest in a stolen van with no gas and no way to call anyone. What were we thinking?" "We were thinking we were smarter than this," Marcus said, his voice dropping into a bitter, low tone that reminded me dangerously of his father. He slammed the atlas shut and threw it onto the floor. I reached down and picked it up, smoothing out the damp pages. I looked at the vast, empty spaces between the lines. In my glass office in the year 2000, I would eventually have the world at my fingertips. But here, in the heart of the 90s, the world was a giant, unfeeling maze. The van sputtered. It was a tiny mechanical hiccup, but it sent a jolt of ice through my chest. "Chris!" I started. I know, he hissed, pumping the gas pedal. The engine gave a long, wheezing groan, the rhythm of the cylinders failing one by one. We weren't flying anymore. We were coasting in momentum, the heavy white Econoline losing speed as the road tilted upward. With a final, pathetic shudder, the van came to a dead stop. The heater died instantly, and the only sound was the rain drumming on the tin roof. A cold, relentless percussion. We sat in the sudden, deafening quiet. I looked at Maya. The spark I'd seen in her eyes by the fire was gone, replaced by a wide-eyed, hollow stare. "We're not just lost, are we?" she whispered. I looked out the window at the wall of trees. The forest looked indifferent. It didn't care about our rebellion or our Ivy League pressures. It was just cold. And as a plume of white steam began to hiss from the edges of the hood, I realized the map wasn't the only thing that had cracked. The steam hissed from the hood in a long, mocking whistle, a white ghost vanishing into the gray Oregon rain. We didn't move for a long time. The silence inside the van was suffocating, a thick layer of unsaid, "I told you so's," and rising panic. The temperature began to drop almost immediately. Without the engine's heartbeat, the Econoline was just a cold metal box on a forgotten logging road. "Pop the hood," Marcus said, his voice flat. Chris didn't move. His hands were still fused to the steering wheel at 10 and 2. "And do what, Marcus? I'm not a mechanic. Are you?" "Just pop the damn hood!" Marcus roared, the sound echoing off the van's interior walls like a gunshot. Chris shoved the lever and the hood clicked open. Marcus stepped out into the mud, his flannel shirt soaking through in seconds. I followed him, not because I knew anything about engines, but because I couldn't stand the sight of Maya's face in the passenger seat. She looked like she was watching a dream die in real time. When we lifted the hood, a final burp of bitter-smelling vapor hit us. Even to my untrained eyes, it looked like a disaster. A belt had snapped, and fluid, bright green and smelling of sweet poison, was splattered across the engine block. "It's the radiator," I said, my voice trembling. "And the belt. We're done." Marcus didn't scream this time. He just stood there, letting the rain wash over his face, looking up at the towering Douglas firs that hemmed us in. "Done," he whispered. "We're not just lost, we're stranded." We retreated back into the van, huddled together like survivors of a shipwreck. We tried to make a plan, but every option died in the cold air. We had no cell phones to call for a tow. The nearest payphone was likely 20 miles back down a road we couldn't walk in this weather. Our freedom was now a 10 by 5 foot space filled with the smell of wet wool and damp fear. By late afternoon, the light began to fail. Hunger set in, a sharp gnawing reminder of our lack of preparation. We opened a tin of peaches, passing it around in a grim circle. The syrup was cloyingly sweet, a pathetic contrast to the bitterness in the air. "We should have stayed," Claire whispered, her voice breaking. She was curled into a ball on the back bench. "My mom. She's probably called the police by now. They'll think we were kidnapped. They'll think we're dead." "Maybe it's better if they do," Chris snapped, though there was no heat in it, only exhaustion. "At least someone will be looking for us." "Shut up, Chris," Jetta said, her eyes flashing. "We made a choice. We're adults, right? That's what we wanted?" The word adults felt like a joke. We were children playing dress-up in our father's clothes and our mother's anxieties. The romanticized rebellion of the previous night felt like ancient history. Here in the dark, the 90s weren't about grunge or cool apathy. They were about the terrifying realization that there was no safety net. I reached out and took Maya's hand. It was ice cold. She didn't pull away, but she didn't squeeze back either. She was staring out the window, watching the shadows of the trees stretch across the road like bars. Suddenly the van rocked. A heavy, rhythmic thud echoed from the roof, followed by the sound of metal groaning under weight. "What was that?" Jetta gasped, clutching Marcus's arm. We froze, our breaths coming in shallow, foggy puffs. Thud, thud, thud. Something was on top of the van. Something heavy. Something that didn't sound like a branch or the wind. "Chris, give me the flashlight," I whispered, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would shatter my ribs. I grabbed the heavy mag light and clicked it on, the beam cutting a yellow swath through the darkness. I pointed it toward the windshield, and for a second the light reflected off a pair of eyes, wide, wild, and unblinking, staring back at us from the edge of the hood. The scream that ripped through the van was silenced only by a sudden, violent smash against the driver's side window. The glass didn't shatter, but the spiderweb of cracks that bloomed across the driver's side window was enough to freeze the air in our lungs. Outside, the beast revealed itself as the yellow beam the maglite steadied. It wasn't a predator from a campfire story. It was a man. He was draped in a heavy, grease-stained canvas coat, his face obscured by a matted beard and the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. He looked like he had grown out of the forest floor itself, feral, ancient, and deeply unimpressed. "Out!" he croaked. The word was barely human, more like the grinding of stones. Chris, white-faced and trembling, slowly unlocked the door. We spilled out into the mud, our hands instinctively raised, our expensive sneakers sinking into the muck. The man stood by a battered flatbed truck that had pulled up silently behind the van, its headlights off. "You're on a logging spur, kids," the man said, his eyes scanning our group, lingering on Maya's camera and Marcus's clean flannel. "Road's closed for the season. You're lucky I was coming up to check the traps. Another night of this rain and the road washes out. You'd be part of the mountain by spring." He didn't offer a handshake or a smile. He didn't look like a savior. He looked like a mirror. In his hard-weather gaze, we didn't see rebels or intellectuals. We saw sick, soft, suburban children who had mistaken a tantrum for a revolution. "Can you fix it?" Marcus asked, his voice cracking. He tried to reclaim some of his usual bravado, but it withered under the man's stare. Fix it? The man spat into the mud. It's a blown head gasket and a snapped belt. I can tow you to the station at the junction, but it'll cost you. Goss ain't free, and my time's worth more than your apologies. The survival lesson began in the back of that flatbed truck. He made us leave the van behind for the night, hooked up to a rusted winch. We huddled in the back of the truck, exposed to the lashing wind as we descended the mountain. There were no mixtapes here. There was only the roar of the diesel engine and the smell of raw pine and rusted iron. We arrived at a dilapidated gas station, a lone, flickering neon sign for Chester's, gasping against the darkness. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee and menthol cigarettes. Chester, the man from the mountain, pointed toward a payphone in the corner. It was a greasy, chrome-plated relic of the world we thought we left behind. "Call him," Chester said, leaning against the counter. "Before the sheriff finds the van reported stolen. I don't need no heat on my mountain." "We aren't calling," Maya said, her voice small but defiant. She was shivering violently, her hair matted to her forehead. "We have money. We'll pay for the repair and keep going." Chester let out a dry, hacking laugh. "With what? That shop's closed till Monday. Parts gotta come from Eugene. You got 3 days' worth of hotel money and a repair bill that'll run you $500 easy?" We looked at each other. The pool of money in the envelope suddenly felt like play money. In the harsh, buzzing, fluorescent light of the station, the reality of our vulnerability was absolute. We were hungry, cold, and legally in possession of a stolen vehicle. The 90s hadn't given us freedom. They had given us a payphone and a choice between pride and safety. I walked over to the phone. The receiver was heavy, cold, and smelled of 1,000 other desperate conversations. I looked at the group. Marcus was staring at the floor. His shoulders slumped. Jada was crying silently. Maya was looking at me, her eyes pleading for a different answer. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper with my home number written on it. My finger hovered over the 0 for the operator. "Leo, don't," Maya whispered. "We have to, Maya," I said, my voice heavy with the first real weight of adulthood. "If we don't call, we're not rebels. We're just missing." I dropped the coins into the slot. The mechanical clink-clink felt like the sound of a trap snapping shut. As the line began to ring 1,000 miles away in a house filled with SAT prep books and silent expectations, I realized that the hardest part of the trip wasn't getting lost. It was being found. The line clicked open. "Hello!" My mother's voice came through, jagged with a week's worth of terror. I closed my eyes, the neon open sign blurring into a smear of red light. "Mom," I whispered. "It's me. I'm at a station called Chester's. We need help." The silence in the diner was louder than the rain. After the calls were made, time didn't just slow down, it curdled. We sat in a vinyl booth that smelled of decades of spilled grease and regret and watching the door. Chester had gone back to his back room, leaving us with 6 glasses of lukewarm tap water and the hum of a refrigerator that sounded like a dying hornet. No one spoke. The pact we had made under the pier, the shared fire of our rebellion, had been extinguished by the dial tone. Every time the bell above the door jingled, we flinched. We were waiting for the rescue, but it felt more like a retrieval of lost property. "My dad is going to kill me," Chris said, his voice a flat, hollow drone. He was staring at his reflection in the dark window. "Not because I took the van, but because I failed at taking it. He always said I didn't have the stomach for the real world." I guess he was right. "He wasn't right, Chris," I said, but the words felt thin, like I was reciting lines from a play I no longer believed in. "Wasn't he?" Marcus snapped. He was shredding a paper napkin into tiny snowy piles. "Look at us. We made it 2 days. 2 days and we're back on the leash. We're going back to the classrooms and the dinner tables and the what do you want to do with your life interrogations. Only now they have the leverage. They win." Jada reached across the table, her hand hovering near his, but she didn't touch him. The intimacy we had felt by the river was gone. Out there we were a tribe, and here under the buzzing fluorescent lights we were just 6 kids who had made a mess. Maya was the only one who didn't look defeated. She was looking at the payphone, her jaw set. Suddenly she stood up and walked toward the door. "Maya, where are you going?" I asked, sliding out of the booth. "Outside," she said, her voice tight. "I need to breathe air that doesn't smell like deep fryer oil." I followed her out into the covered porch. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and the air was freezing, sharp with the scent of wet asphalt and pine. She leaned against a rusted vending machine, her breath coming in jagged white plumes. "Do you think they'll understand?" she asked, looking out the dark silhouette of the mountains. "That it wasn't about the van, or the commune?" "They'll think it was a phase," I said, leaning beside her. "A moment of teenage impulsivity. They'll put it in a box and use it to keep us in line for the next 4 years. She turned to me, her eyes wet but fierce. "They can't put the feeling in a box, Leo. They weren't there when the fire was burning. They didn't see the way the stars looked when we thought we were free. That belongs to us. Even if we go back, that part stays out here." She reached into her camera bag and pulled out a roll of film, the one she'd used at the river. She held it like it was a piece of her own heart. "I'm going to develop this. I'm going to keep it in my drawer, and every time I'm sitting in a lecture hall or board meeting, I'm going to look at it and remember that for 48 hours, I wasn't anyone's project." Before I could answer, the horizon flickered. A pair of headlights, bright, blue-white, and authoritative, cut through the mist. Then another. Then a third. The cavalcade was coming. The parents. The authority. The accountability we had fled was arriving in a fleet of late-model sedans. I looked at Maya. She took my hand, her grip so tight it hurt. For a moment we weren't kids in 1994. We were just 2 people standing on the edge of a cliff, watching the tide come in. "Leo," she whispered as the first car pulled into the gravel lot, its tires crunching with a sound like breaking bone. "Promise me you won't let them make you forget." I looked at the approaching lights, feeling the weight of the coming years settling onto my shoulders like a heavy coat. "I promise," I said. And then the car door opened, and the first of the voices we had tried so hard to silence began to call our names into the dark. The drive back to Silver Bay wasn't a journey. It was a funeral procession. The 6 of us had been split up, distributed among the various cars like evidence seized from a crime scene. I sat in the back of my father's sedan, the leather seats feeling unnervingly soft and smelling of expensive air freshener. The silence was absolute, save for the hum of the tires on the asphalt. My father didn't yell. He didn't even look at me in the rearview mirror. His silence was a wall, thick and immovable, designed to make me feel small. Through the window, I watched the white Econoline van, hooked to a tow truck, fade into a ghost in the distance. We were being hauled back to our lives, back to the potential that felt like a life sentence. 2 days later, the school board had finished their discussions, and the police had filed their reports. Because of our families standing in the town, there would be no charges, just a mountain of community service and a permanent asterisk next to our names. But on our final night, before the re-education began, we managed one last meeting. We didn't go to the pier. We met in the parking lot of a closed-down drive-in theater at the edge of town. The 90s were flickering out all around us. The drive-in was being torn down to make room for a new shopping center. We sat on the hoods of our separate cars, looking at each other across the dark gaps of the pavement. "Everything feels different," Claire whispered, pulling her cardigan tight. "The air, the lights. It's like the town shrunk while we were gone." "It didn't shrink," Marcus said. He looked tired. The fire in him had been replaced by a heavy, quiet resignation. He was going to Yale. He had agreed to the prep courses. The deal had been struck. "We just saw how big the rest of it was. You can't unsee that." Chris sat on his tailgate, tossing a stone into the weeds. "My dad sold the van. Said he couldn't look at it without seeing a thief. He's making me work at the hardware store every weekend until graduation to pay for the radiator." "I'm leaving," Jada said suddenly. We all turned to her. "Not like before. Not running. But the second I get that diploma, I'm gone. I'm going to Chicago. I'm going to lose myself in a city where no one knows my middle name." One by one they spoke of their futures. The real ones. The ones shaped by the collision of their dreams and the world's reality. The lost trip hadn't given us a new life, but it had given us a perspective that no SAT score could quantify. We had looked into the void of our own vulnerability and survived it. I walked over to Maya. She was leaning against her mother's car, her camera bag at her feet. She looked at me, and I saw the toll the last few days had taken. The rebellion was over, but the person who had survived it was still there. "I developed the film," she said softly, handing me a single print. It was the photo of the 6 of us by the river just before the storm hit. We were laughing, caught in a blur of motion and firelight. We looked invincible. We looked like we owned the world, even though we didn't even own the van we were sleeping in. "It's beautiful," I said. "It's a lie," she replied with a faint, bittersweet smile. "But it's a beautiful lie. It's the version of us I'm going to remember when things get hard." We stood there in the dark, 6 teenagers on the cusp of a decade that was about to change everything. The internet was coming, the world was going digital, and the analog grit of our youth was about to become a vintage aesthetic. But for that one moment, we were still just us. "We're going to be okay, aren't we?" Claire asked. The question hung in the cool night air. None of us had the answer, but for the first time the uncertainty didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a space we could finally fill ourselves. Maya stepped forward and kissed my cheek. "See you in the future, Leo," she whispered. She got into her car and the others followed. One by one the taillights faded into the night, leaving me alone in the empty lot. I looked down at the photo in my hand, the edges already beginning to curl in the damp air, and I realized that while the road had ended, the journey had just begun. The San Francisco morning had fully arrived, the fog burning off the bay to reveal a city that looked like a motherboard of glass and steel. I sat in my office, the silence finally broken by the rhythmic thrum of a laser printer in the corner, spitting out the agenda for the London merger. The year 2000 was a relentless machine, and I was one of its well-oiled gears. I looked back down at the Polaroid, the beautiful lie Maya had given me. 6 years had passed. In the digital world, that was an eternity. We had traded flannel for fleece, mixtapes for MP3s, and payphones for the constant tethered chirping of our Nokia handsets. We were the generation that had successfully crossed the bridge into the new millennium. But sitting in this climate-controlled sanctuary, I felt a sudden, sharp ache for the cold. I reached for my mouse and pulled up a private directory on our server. I wasn't supposed to store personal files here, but some things were too heavy for a home computer. I clicked on a folder titled Oregon_94. There were scanned versions of Maya's photos. I scrolled through them. There was Chris looking young and terrified behind the wheel. Marcus, his face illuminated by a campfire that had gone out half a decade ago. And Jada, laughing into a wind that had long since died down. I had kept my promise. I hadn't forgotten. But life, as it turned out, wasn't a movie with a clean ending. Marcus was indeed at a law firm in New York. We spoke once a year, our voices stiff with the professional armor we both wore. Chris had stayed in Silver Bay, eventually taking over the hardware store he once tried to flee. He seemed happy, or at least settled, which was a kind of victory in itself. And Maya? She hadn't gone to Princeton. She had vanished into the art scene in Prague for 3 years before landing a job as a photojournalist. Every few months I'd see her name in a tiny byline in a magazine, or I'd get an unsigned postcard with no return address. Just a picture of a road, a river, or a rusted-out van. The phone on my desk buzzed. "Leo, the London line is open. They're waiting for the creative lead." I stood up, adjusting my tie in the reflection of the window. I looked at the man in the glass. He was successful. He was accountable. He was exactly what the parents in Silver Bay had wanted us to become. But as I turned to leave, my eyes caught the small green online light on my messenger app. A new message popped up from an unlisted handle, the Atlas 94. I clicked it. There was no text, just a single image attachment. I opened it. It was a photo of a sunrise over a rugged, pine-covered mountain range, the Cascades. In the foreground, resting on a weathered wooden fence post, was a tattered, familiar-looking paper map, weighted down by a small, rusted piece of metal, a van key. The caption at the bottom read, "The road didn't end, Leo. It just changed names." "Are you still recording?" A sudden breezy laugh escaped my throat, startling Sarah as she walked past my door. The weight of the London call, the IPO, and the glass office suddenly felt as light as wood smoke. "Leo, you coming?" Sarah called out. I grabbed my jacket, but I didn't close the laptop. I left the image of the mountains glowing on the screen, a digital campfire in the heart of the tech revolution. "Yeah," I said, stepping into the hallway with a stride that felt less like an executive and more like a runaway. "I'm coming, but Sarah, cancel my afternoon. I think I need to go for a drive." I walked toward the elevator, the 90s still ringing in my ears like a beautiful, distorted chord, finally understanding that we hadn't lost the trip. We had just been waiting for the right moment to start the engine again.